And we're back in the studio like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your miserable, early, very early, Saturday morning here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. The newest entry in our continuing series of the great movies. It was recently Russell Crowe's birthday, and if I'm asked the question, as I asked myself, what is the single best film that Russell Crowe has ever been in? What is the single best performance that Russell Crowe has ever given in a film? Well, for many people, the best movie he was ever in is Gladiator. For many of those same people, the best performance he ever gave is his Oscar-winning turn in Gladiator, although there are some people who would answer a beautiful mind to both questions, but I am not either of those sorts of people. No judgment here. This is the Planet Fitness of podcast, a judgment-free zone. You are free to tell me that his best movie is L.A. Confidential, or maybe it's even his performance a few years ago in that hilarious movie where he plays a guy with road rage who basically turns out to not really just be a road rager, but a bit of a serial lunatic. But I believe that the best film Russell Crowe was ever in is Peter Weir's 2003 adaptation of Patrick O'Brien's novels, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. And it's a movie that, I gotta be honest, didn't look that interesting. I did not see it in theaters despite rapturous critical praise. It just didn't seem like a kind of film that I would be into, which from a certain perspective is disgraceful, given that I am a film scholar. I have the so-called hardware. I have the degree that says this is my kind of movie. It is a movie for movie fans. It is a movie for fans of history, shining light on not just a piece of history that I didn't know anything about, but there are concepts in this film that if you had not previously stopped to think about how certain things were probably done. How many years ago is this movie set? 220 years ago? It's set in the early part of the 19th century. These are things that I hadn't contemplated and probably never even would have gotten around to contemplating. But thanks to this movie and the incredible verisimilitude, to use Richard Donner's word when describing his goals for making Superman 1978, but Peter Weir was committed to taking viewers onto what it would really be like living on a ship all those years ago. What do you do when this happens? What do you do when this happens? How do you handle this, that, and the other thing? Is extraordinary. Now, despite the fact that Master and Commander was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, winning 2, including Best Cinematography for, I think, Robert Richardson. I could be wrong on that. And it made $211 million at the worldwide box office. Now, without context, that's phenomenal. Weir's commitment to verisimilitude meant that everything was built. There are certain things that were somewhat built to scale, but everything was built. They tried to use as little in the way of CGI as possible. The battle scenes look like real battle scenes. The clothing is era appropriate. Everything in this film, it feels like you've been transported onto this ship. The effect is thrilling. Speaking of Russell Crowe, he had an interesting back and forth about this movie, but also about the fact that L.A. Confidential inexplicably was voted like the best movie of all time, combining critical reception with audience approval and all of this sort of stuff. But this film shows a side of life that, why would we ever even think about what it is? I mean, I've been on cruises. I never stopped to think, hey, what was it like to be on a ship if you literally lived at sea for months? Like, how do you do that? But in a world of where I was going with the first point, sorry, it is early, is that the film cost $150 million to make because of the commitment to realism. And Peter Weir had made the studio a lot of money with The Truman Show, so he had almost unlimited rope here. So the film is considered a disappointment from the financial perspective. because there's a version of this where you make a movie set at sea, it costs $25 million, and then a $211 million worldwide gross, 10 Oscar nominations, 2 wins. Rock and roll, fucking awesome. But this film and the kind of back and forth Russell Crowe got into, where somebody on social media mentioned how they thought Master and Commander looked dull and they didn't want to see it, or I only watched the first few minutes, it was boring, something like that. And Russell Crowe, who's not really this kind of a guy, yeah, he has a temper, he's had some issues. I think he threw a phone at a bellhop in New York many years ago. But he's not a social media, he doesn't appear to be a guy who would give a shit about social media. But somehow someone called his attention to this, and he actually clapped back at the guy. He said, I hate when people don't have the attention span to watch a movie like this, or words to that effect. But he said it in a funnier way than that. And this movie explores, and from a certain perspective of film scholarship, it explains in its own way, audiences will see, they will watch a seafaring epic such as Pirates of the Caribbean multiple times, but they do not have the patience to sit through Master and Commander once because it doesn't look interesting. Me, of all people, falling victim to that. Well, when I finally got around to see it, it hit the masterpiece button immediately. I could not believe how good this movie was and is. And right away, the idea of putting the audience onto the ship. Do you ever stop and think, because you know that naval ships existed in the time before telephones, the time before, warfare, right? We learned about Napoleonic wars in school. At least I hope you did. I did. We didn't go into that much detail, but we knew there were ships, there were flotillas, there was the infamous Spanish Armada, which we seem to keep revisiting. I didn't ever understand why it was so important, but that was 16th, 17th century. This is already later. But you ever stop and think, if you're going to be at sea for months, what do you do for food? What do you do for food? Well, right at the beginning of Master and Commander, we have an eye-opening look through the lower decks of the ship, where you have these enormous sacks of grains of all different kinds, and you see livestock on board. Now, I got to tell you, at no time in the first, 29 years of my life before I saw this movie, at no time did I ever stop to think, hey, I wonder if they would keep livestock on board if they were going to be at sea for months. No, and I knew that there were voyages that seemingly never ended, but light bulb never went off. And here we are 3 minutes into this film, and my jaw is on the ground, and I'm picking it up because I can't believe there's livestock on board. That looks like a small cow. What the fuck is that? Is that a goat? What? And from that incredible opening, we meet Russell Crowe's Captain Jack Aubrey, the hero of, there were 20 novels written by Patrick O'Brian, and the idea, and Russell wanted to do it, and so did Weir, was that this was going to be a film series, a trilogy probably. They couldn't do all of the movies. You don't have enough years of life to do all the movies, but because the film wasn't really that successful financially, and you can't blame the studio for not wanting to commission $200 million for a sequel to Master and Commander. But we meet Captain Jack Aubrey, who I guess is supposed to be in his mid-30s. He's already a legend, and he commands this ship called the Surprise is the name of the ship. And it's the Napoleonic era, and Napoleon is kind of the antagonist of this film, but we don't meet him. We just know that the French ship, the Acheron, that they are in direct combat with at various points, is essentially directed from the mainland by Napoleon. And so this film has naval battles, but this is not an action film. This isn't really a combat film. This is a movie which really explores a particular story, but what life was like on a ship and the kind of ebbs and flows of a long voyage. And in another incredible gobsmacking sequence where, ask yourself this question too. In the, let's say, 19th century, you have a ship You go through a battle, and the ship takes heavy damage. The ship is about 70% of it is beat to shit. Right? Part of it is falling apart. Well, what's your process there? Now what? Well, what do you mean now what? Are you stupid? You got to go back to port, go back to London. Yeah, well, what if going back home isn't one of the choices rendered? And not because of social media or someone getting a text message, you're not allowed to go back to port. You got to go after that ship anyway, even though you're 70% fucked here. Well, how about if instead of going back home, you go to a nearby island? You start cutting down trees and you use the wood to rebuild the ship. Another thing that this movie shows that most people, at least me, I don't think that I'm an uncurious individual. I like to think that I'm an outside the box processor here, but didn't even think that that was doable. And here we are in the world of the film. We will refit at sea. And that's how Russell Crowe describes what they're going to do. And I remember first time watching the movie, I said, what the fuck is he talking about? What does that mean? Refit what? Suits? What do you mean? Oh. Whoa. Exactly. This film is one incredible scene after another, but it's not a series of vignettes. There is a through line, and when I mention the ebb and flow of a voyage, where the crew at various points is elated and they are depressed and downtrodden, and something that Pirates of the Caribbean also gets into, but the notion of luck, fortune, and if members of the crew begin to believe that one in their midst is bad luck, they might start taking out what they think is, this guy is doing this somehow. And then you get into concepts of mutiny. And how can a captain maintain respect, adoration even, of the crew when he sometimes has to actually crack the whip? Maybe not literally, or maybe literally, but where he has to discipline the men who are mostly great sailors, hard workers. But when you start getting into situations of what we would call hazing, captain's got to step up and say, you there, stand fast, and mete out discipline, risking turning enormous chunks of the crew turning on him. But order must be maintained. And without any kind of rule book or saying, well, this is not code, this is not protocol. He has to follow his better angels, and sometimes he's got to get a little mean, because order must be maintained, and we cannot allow this sort of bullshit to fester. We've got a job to do. It's bigger than a small little revolt from a couple of sailors who just haven't really been out there, still a little wet behind the ears. Now, another shocking thing that this movie gets into is the fact that there are kids, little kids, on the voyage, and they're not just there for show. It's not Jack Aubrey, bring your son to work day. No. This kid was related to that guy who was on my first voyage, and you have a bunch of kids on the ship. And most of the midshipmen are probably supposed to be in their teens, but there are kids there that probably look like they're 11 or 12 years old, maybe. But they're sailors. They're not given any special privileges. They sure as hell don't get any rum. There's so many different things in this film that illuminate pieces of naval life that most never contemplated. And the story it tells is, in a sense, about two best friends who engage in a consistent battle of wills. It almost takes the form of a buddy movie. But the two main characters, Paul Bettany, Stephen Maturin, the ship's doctor, and Russell Crowe's Jack Aubrey, they've known each other for years already as the film begins. This is not of Charles Grodin's character of Jonathan Mardukas, but Charles Grodin doesn't know who's this guy. He's just a random bounty hunter. But then we find out that Bobby D is not just a random bounty hunter. He was an ex-cop who got run out of Chicago but sparks fly throughout. But they have an antagonistic from the first because each guy needs something from the other that the other doesn't want to happen. De Niro needs to pick up Charles Grodin's Jonathan Mardukas and bring him in. Mardukas, I can't let this guy bring me in. I'll be dead in 2 minutes. I got to get away from this asshole. I can't do it. In the world of this film, the doctor and the captain have a deep respect. You might even say, in a kind of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker way, they have as deep of a platonic, presented as heterosexual relationship as two guys can have. They fight like a married couple. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. It is how the film presents them. And when we say fight, we're talking philosophical. That these guys have legitimate disagreements with each other while rarely raising their voices or, wow, this might turn into a brawl. Well, it wouldn't be much of a brawl. I don't think the doctor would have much of a chance against the captain of the ship. But the battle between these guys at so many different points in the film, and Russell as Captain Jack, there are moments where we almost kind of lose him, meaning we think, is this guy even redeemable? Like, what the fuck is going on here? Because he appears to take actions where we're scratching our heads. We're like, well, this can't be the right thing to do. This is the wrong decision. Oh my God, they're all going to die, or something like that. But without spoiling it, there is a moment, an extraordinary moment in the film, where they end up at the Galapagos Islands, and Captain Jack engages in an extended bit of humanity that we don't see coming. And certainly Paul Bettany as Dr. Maturin, he doesn't ever conceive as possible for someone like Captain Jack. And the acting by both guys, I mean, how did Russell not win Best Actor that year? I have no idea. Many people thought he should have won, more so for A Beautiful Mind even than Gladiator, but he was just knocking out one incredible performance after another. He was the right actor at the right time. He's phenomenal in LA Confidential, didn't win supporting. He's great in The Insider, didn't win Best Actor. He won for Gladiator, and many people thought he should have won for A Beautiful Mind, but they went with Denzel. And I mean, Training Day is not Denzel's best performance, but the reality is that Denzel could have won a couple of Best Actor statuettes already. He could have won for Malcolm X, and he sure as fuck, he didn't even get nominated for Philadelphia. And I love Tom Hanks, but Tom Hanks in Philadelphia, it's a very straightforward performance. The character has very little in the way of shadings, where Denzel's character of Joe Miller is a fascinating character. He's presented as a bigot who becomes a reasonable guy by the end of the film. He grows and he changes, and Denzel's performance is incredible. And Training Day's, it's an okay movie, but I watched it once. I have no desire to ever see it again. Denzel's done a lot better work than that. But unfortunately in Hollywood, it's the way it goes. Al Pacino winning for all that screaming and yelling. And you know me on this channel, I'm the biggest Al Pacino fan there is. He's an absentee landlord. She's got a great ass. And you got your head all the way up it. Well, Al, in Scent of a Woman, won the Best Actor. Denzel in Malcolm X was the guy who should have won. I mean, I would even put Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven above Al in Scent of a Woman, but Al had gotten screwed a bunch of times. It's the way it goes. Russell in Master and Commander is extraordinary. And Paul Bettany as Dr. Stephen Maturin, how did he not get a Best Supporting Actor nomination? It's a three-dimensional character, a fully formed, fleshed-out performance. The only spoiler I'll give you about this character, he's the ship's doctor. He's a nice guy, very likable. He has to perform. He's like a medic also when somebody gets wounded in battle. So he's not technically really a surgeon, but he's got to do some really terrible stuff in this film. If somebody is going to lose their arm, well, who's going to cut off this person's arm? I guess he has to. You know, you kind of run out of, well, maybe you can do it. You know, it's the movie Spies Like Us, or Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd. They have to do an appendectomy. And Chevy realizes it and Dan doesn't. So what does Chevy ask Dan? Are you good with your hands? Are you good with your hands? Meaning if he's good with his hands, maybe he can do an appendectomy. There's a moment in this film where Paul Bettany's Stephen Maturin takes an injury. He gets wounded in battle, even though he's just a doctor. It's not like there's anywhere on the ship to go where, well, he's a doctor, so we shouldn't. If you blow up a quarter of the ship and a doctor happens to be hit with shrapnel, he might as well be a combatant. He's no longer a doctor. So there isn't anybody who can remove, let's say, a piece of a bullet from his gut. He's the only person who can do it. So they put some 19th century numbing agent on him, but he can't black out from drinking because he's the one who needs to do the surgery. The scene where he attempts to take a bullet out of himself and then patch himself up is such brilliant movie making. Maybe Spielberg could have done it, maybe James Cameron, but it's difficult to imagine too many filmmakers editing this scene, shooting and editing it. And I think the other Oscar this movie won was for editing, now that I'm thinking about it. It is incredible. And Bettany's performance, his facial expressions, I mean, the guy's just a fucking boss. He's such a home run here. He's never given a bad performance, even absurd characters like he played in the Da Vinci Code. The movie's okay. It's not great. So we follow this ship as they, spoiler alert, they take a lot of damage in their first encounter with the French warship. But Captain Jack Aubrey appears to have some kind of magic. And he is a great captain. And Russell has a couple of moments where he sort of winks at the audience, where he's kind of playing to our expectations of him and the sort of swashbuckling nature, literally, of this kind of character. Where there's this one moment in the movie where they are way behind the French ship. And Russell, with a little smile, he uses a line that you might have heard Errol Flynn use in the 30s and 40s. He kind of smiles, not quite at the audience, but he smiles and he goes, "I guess we haven't a moment to lose." It is such a kind of cheeseball line, but because it's Russell in this role in this movie, I don't know, it works. It's supposed to make us smile, and it does. Now, the single best moment in this film, I actually posted it on social media, a clip from YouTube the other day, where the men are having dinner. And it looks like, despite the limitations of being on the ship for so long, I mentioned the livestock, the grain, and they have, 19th century appropriate cooking facilities as far as how they would prepare the food and heat the food. It's all really fascinating stuff. There are infinite individual components of this film that you can simply study to see. This is how this was done in 1805. This is how that was done in 1805. And every component is so beautifully done. It looks exactly like it's supposed to, era appropriate. This is how they would cook, I guess, their pancakes in 1805. This is how they would prepare, baby lamb as the main course in 1805. So the men are around the table, they're having their wine, and they have what looks like a reasonable feast. And there's a little bit of bread there. And Russell Crowe gets a little bit of a devilish look on his face. He goes, "Do you see those two weevils, Doctor?" And Paul Bettany, who, in order to see close up, he has to take his glasses off. He's nearsighted. So, I'm sorry, he would be farsighted. I always get that mixed up. Anyway, it doesn't really matter whether he's nearsighted or farsighted. Maybe his glasses suck. It's the 18th century, 19th century. So he takes his glasses off. And there are these two tiny little, I wouldn't have known they were weevils, but they're crawling around near the bread, not particularly appetizing. He says, "Yeah, I do." "Which would you choose?" What the fuck does that mean? They look like two little ants crawling around. He doesn't say that. He can't answer the question. He says, there's not a scrap of difference between them. I don't know what you're talking about. He said, if you had to choose, if you were forced to make a choice between these two, which would you pick? So now he's mad. Now the doctor's getting frustrated. Jack's just fucking with me. We got all these guys in here, and he's just fucking with me now. "I would choose the right-hand weevil. It has significant advantages in length and muscle tone. And Russell slams his hand on the table and says, I have you. Don't you know that in the service, one must always choose the lesser of two weevils? And the guys crack up. And Paul Bettany is just, he's bewildered. It's almost as if he doesn't get the joke. But if you look at the faces of the men during this scene before the punchline, they are laughing and they are trying not to laugh because they know this joke. And as I said also on social media, Russell Crowe is a man who taught me that sometimes in life we must choose the lesser of two weevils. There's even a moment in the film where he's faced with an impossible choice, and he's debating his choice as captain with the doctor. And Paul Bettany earnestly says, Jack, you know, this really is the lesser of two evils. And Russell Crowe, again with that little smile, just quietly goes, weevils. The lesser of two weevils. And they drink to the lesser of two weevils. Well, another problem with trying to, let's say, capture an enemy captain in the 19th century. How do you know who looks like what? Never stop to think? How did they know George Washington was George Washington? I don't know. There's no pictures. There's no social media. There's no anything going viral. So there's a moment in the movie where they capture somebody who they think is, okay, this is our guy. No, I don't think that's actually him. Son of a bitch. You almost are on the honor system. Because if you have a crew of 300 people, let's just say, you could dress a random that she would have it maybe among her 10 favorite films of all time. That is how good the movie worked. And I had the same reaction. Well, maybe I'm not going to like it. It doesn't look that interesting. I haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications.